Welcome to Sunday School for February 14th, 2021. We are in Old Testament 3.1. And I want to apologize because for the last 2 weeks I forgot to put the Sunday School on Instagram. We've been putting it on YouTube because Shannon Connor, our administrator, has been doing that for me. But normally I would, after Sunday School, I would go and publish Sunday School, and I've forgotten to do it. So we recorded 2 lessons, and one of them I went ahead and published on Thursday of this week, but the other one is lost to history. So sorry, you never got to see Old Testament 2.9. I'm sure it was a good one. Sorry that we spent time recording it now that we never sent it. But this is 3.1, and we're going to be looking at the book of Judges. We looked at Joshua last week, and we looked at the week before at Deuteronomy, and then previously at Numbers. And this is also a time for me to remind you, by the way, that you can join us in person. In fact, we would prefer that you join us in person on Sunday mornings at 9:45 in the Frith for Sunday School. We'd love to have you. We'll be teaching this exact lesson. This is also a chance to remind you that we don't have fellowship tonight. There's no fellowship tonight because it's a holiday weekend, and we typically don't have fellowship on a holiday weekend. So happy President's Day. We'll get back with you about fellowship on next Sunday, February 21st. So those are our announcements. Like I said, we're going to be looking at the book of Judges. The book of Judges. You can turn in your Bible if you have it, and we're going to jump right into it. So let's do that. Okay, well, if you have your Bible, the first place I'd like you to turn to the book of Judges is found in chapter 1. And I just want to read the first part of several verses. We're going to look at chapter 1, verse 27, 29, 30, 31, and 33. I just want to point something out to you before we read something from Judges chapter 2. But I just want you to notice how those verses start. Judges 1, 27, 29, 30, 31, and 33. It says this: Manasseh didn't drive out the inhabitants. Judges 1:29 starts, and Ephraim did not drive out the Canaanites. Judges 1:30 starts out, Zebulun did not drive out the inhabitants. Judges 1:31 says, Asher did not drive out the inhabitants. Judges 1:33 starts, Naphtali did not drive out the inhabitants. And that's going to be very important for what we talk about this week, especially when we read Judges chapter 2, verses 1 through 3. So if you now flip over to Judges chapter 2, 1 through 3, and let me read this to you, because that's the context for what the Lord says here. Let's read that. It says, Now the angel of the Lord went up from Gilgal to Bochim, and he said, I brought you up from Egypt, and brought you into the land that I swore to give to your fathers. And I said, I will never break my covenant with you. And you shall make no covenant with the inhabitants of this land. You shall break down their altars. But you have not obeyed my voice. What is this you have done? So now I say, I will not drive them out before you, but they shall become thorns in your sides, and their gods shall be a snare to you. That's Judges chapter 2, verses 1 through 3. Now, what is happening in this passage? There's a lot of things that we need to understand as far as the context of Judges. Maybe the most famous verses in Judges are when it says multiple times that it was a time when everyone did what was right in their own eyes and there was no king over Israel. And in many ways, the Judges are the precursors to the kings of Israel. Saul is going to be the first king of Israel, and it's going to come after the series of judges, rule by where God raises up a judge to deliver Israel from some problem that they're in. And this happens over and over again in this book. And God raises many judges, maybe someone like Gideon or Barak or Deborah, maybe most famously Samson, right? These are all judges over Israel that God raised them up as a leader to rule over Israel. But the context of Judges is that the people of Israel have not done what God commanded them to do. And specifically what we just read in Judges chapter 2, verses 1 through 3, it highlights the choice that the people of Israel made to do what was practical instead of what God commanded. to do what was practical instead of what God commanded. God commanded the Israelites to drive out the inhabitants of the promised land and to not make covenant with them. Now, is this God saying, being a big old meanie God, oh God, how could you be so mean? Why would you not want your people to make covenant and to learn to live in the midst of these people? Well, God is not being mean here. God understands his people, and he understands how his people are prone to run after other gods, to do what's called syncretism, to try to combine worship of God with the worship of other gods. And so he commands them at the offset, do not make covenant with these people. Do not marry your daughters to their sons and your sons to their daughters, because you are going to be tempted to stray from worshiping me, the God who delivered you out of Egypt, and to worship these other gods. And sure enough, not only does God say that that's going to happen if they don't follow his commands, when they don't follow his commands, that's exactly what happened. And there's an important lesson for us here, and that's this, is that God is not designed his commands to be easy. God has not designed his commands to be easy or to be simple. That's what we want. We want simplicity and we want ease. And God never calls his people to that. If you look in the Bible, you will see that God is constantly calling people to do things that are difficult, that are frightening, that are uncomfortable. It's doing it over and over again. Pick someone. Pick Ruth or Esther or Moses or Jeremiah or just anybody in the Bible that you can see. You see that God's calling them to do difficult things, not simple things. To get, I hate the phrase outside the comfort zone, because we should really never have any zone of comfort when it comes to this. But that's what God's calling them to do, is to get outside of what they're comfortable doing. I remember a pastor I heard one time said that he asked someone to lead a Bible study. He said, I want you to lead this Bible study. I think it was like a junior high girls Bible study. And he went to a woman and he said, I really think God's put it on my heart. I think you're gifted to do this. I think you'd be good at it. Will you please lead this junior high girls Bible study? And the woman said, well, I'm just not really comfortable doing that. And the pastor said, okay, that's great. And then he said this, which I think is a great line, but one that I might not necessarily use, is he said, yeah, that's awesome. Could you just, I've got my Bible right here. I'm going to give it to you. Will you just point me to the passage where Jesus says, I want you to be comfortable? If you'll just point me to that real quick. What a mic drop by that pastor, by the way. You better be really confident in your relationship to be able to do something like that. But there's a point there, and that's this, is that God, nowhere in the Bible, when someone is called of God, are they doing something that they're like, oh, that'll be easy, God. Thanks for calling me to do something that I never have to trust you to do. That doesn't happen. God always calls us to do difficult things. We choose the path of least resistance. And it's very important that we as Christians don't choose the path of least resistance. Because there's a famous saying, following the path of least resistance makes crooked rivers and crooked men. In other words, when water runs downhill, it follows the path of least resistance. And that's why a river bends and twists and turns, right? Because it's always following the easiest way. And so it makes a crooked river, right? The same is true about us, is that when we try, as the Israelites did here in Judges, when we try to have a ceasefire with sin, or we try to live in harmony with sin, when we do the thing that's the easiest instead of what God's called us to do, what happens? We are bent and twisted and broken. That's what happens to us when we don't follow God's commands. The Israelites said, sure, we could follow God's commands and fight these battles and drive out these people from, the promised land, but it'd be so much easier and we wouldn't have to trust God as much if we just kind of became friends with them, and just learned to live and let live. And that attitude that the Israelites had about the inhabitants of Canaan is the same attitude that we cavalierly have about our sin. That we can somehow domesticate our sin. That we can make it like a pet that we're in control of, right? That is not true, right? That's like having a pet animal, one of these wild animals that will eventually kill you, right? There's like a pet tiger or a pet lion or a pet polar bear. Like, you're playing with fire because that thing is designed to eat you and eventually it will. And that's how we should treat our sin. We cannot have a treaty or a ceasefire or a peace agreement with our sin because our sin doesn't want our good. It wants to kill us. So that's the first thing that we can learn. When it comes to God's commands versus practicality, practicality doesn't even get a say. We are to follow God's commands, especially when they're hard to follow. The second thing I want you to see, and it's related to the first, is that the Israelites practiced halfway faith, right? They practiced halfway faith. Not only did they choose what was practical instead of following God's commands, they followed practicality. They also only practiced their faith halfway when it came to God. Because when we think about the Israelites in the Promised Land, we have to remember, if you read the book of Joshua, they don't have the Promised Land because they were mighty in battle, right? And they don't have the Promised Land because they were very cunning diplomats who were able to finesse, the people. They have the Promised Land because God handed it to them. God handed it to them. He fought for them. They were able to be strong and courageous because God was with them. And when they believed and trusted in God, they achieved victory. And when they doubted God or ignored His commands, they were defeated. So, but when it comes to inhabiting the Promised Land, they again practice some halfway faith, right? And that's what God is reminding them in Judges chapter 2. He's saying, listen, I gave you this land. I've gave you these commands. I fought for you, and I delivered this land into your hand. I did all this for you. Why would you not believe me now? Why would you not trust me when I tell you what to do? And this also has some application for us, because what we do, and we are very much like the Israelites here, is that we are very trusting of God over small things, but we don't trust God when the stakes are very high. We don't trust God in uncomfortable situations. We revert to our trusting our own ingenuity, our own cleverness, our own ability to see things. We think, sure, God said to do this, but I'm going to believe Him for these things, but I'm not going to believe Him for these things. We're going to pick and choose when we're going to believe. This is what we do, and this is what the Israelites do. And in some ways, it's very encouraging to see that we are not that much different from the Israelites. In other ways, it's very discouraging to realize that we still have these same problems, where we want to trust our own abilities instead of trusting God. But real faith, if we practice real faith, it's going to put us in uncomfortable situations. It's always going to put us in uncomfortable situations. It's going to ask us to trust God in the hard moments. And let me just think of a couple situations where you might do this. Because the third thing I want you to see is related to this as well, which is the idea of can't versus won't. Right? We practice faith in God when things are easy or when everything's going our way. But then when things get difficult, lots of times we struggle. And we struggle because we think, well, I just can't do that. I just can't. God's calling me to do this and I just can't do it. And that's kind of what the Israelites were saying. It's like, I don't. And it wasn't an issue of can't. It's an issue of won't. Basically, God looks at the Israelites and says, I asked you to do this and you're saying you can't do it. But I've proven to you over and over again that when I tell you to do something, I will provide you the ability to do it. So what you're really telling me is that not that you can't do it, but that you won't do it. That you refuse to do it. And oftentimes we confuse can't and won't. How does this work out in your life in junior high and high school? Well, think about this for a second. Could you imagine yourself saying, well, I just can't forgive this person. This person has done something to me and I just can't forgive. And I know God has called me to forgive. God's forgiven me of great sin, of awful sin, of all of my awful sin. And I know that if that's true, that I'm called to forgive others of their sins against me. But I just can't forgive this person. I just can't do it. Or maybe this is your situation. Maybe you think for yourself, you have a friend, a close friend even, that is engaged in something that you know they shouldn't be engaged in, whatever it is. A behavior, it's gossip, it's, I don't know what it is. It's cheating in school, or it's pornography, or it's alcohol abuse, or substance abuse, or drug abuse, or there's something going on, right? And you know that this person should not be engaged in this behavior or thinking or speaking in such a way. But you say, well, I can't confront them. I can't say anything. I'm a sinner. I don't want to seem judgmental, or I don't want to ruin our friendship. I just can't do it. And even though you know that God has called you to speak the truth in love to those around you, you just say, I can't do it. You really can do it in both situations. It's not that you can't do it, it's that you won't do it. And the reasons why you won't do it, or the reasons why I won't do it, aren't legitimate reasons. They're illegitimate reasons. They're often sinful reasons. I don't want to forgive this person because I secretly kind of enjoy having this grudge over them and thinking that I'm better than them. And I don't want to confront this friend because I secretly enjoy their friendship and what they can give for me. They give me popularity-wise more than I care about their actual soul. Right? So it's not a can't. I can do it. I just don't want to do it. Right? This is what I deal with my children all the time, especially with Grayson. You know, when someone is 3, 4 years old, and this is how we all were, is I'll tell Grayson, take off your socks. Take off your shoes and socks. Go get undressed. It's time for your bath. Right? And Grayson will say, I can't take off. He'll try one time to take his sock off and say, I can't do it. Well, I've seen him take his socks off multiple times. What he's saying is, I'm kind of sweaty, or maybe my hands are sticky or whatever, and it's hard, so I just don't want to do it. Will you do it for me? Right? And I just want you, I want you to see that is often how we interact with God. Is instead of, when God calls us to do something difficult, we say we just can't do it. What really we're saying is that we don't want to. We don't want to. And that's what happens here, right? God says to the Israelites, drive out all of the Canaanites, all the people of the Promised Land, because if you leave them here, they will have a negative effect on you, and you will start to worship other gods besides me. And they say, we can't do that. And God says, why can't you do it? I've done it. I've given you this promised land. You couldn't have taken the promised land without me. And then the bottom line is God looks at them, and I'm paraphrasing here, and says, it's not that you can't do it, it's that you won't do it. You won't do it. So let me ask you this question. What is it that you won't do that God's calling you to do? What is it? Everyone's going to have a different answer or multiple answers to that, including me. But it's a question you need to ask yourself. What is it that you won't do, even though God's called you to do it? Let's move on to the next section. Okay, so the last thing I want you to see from this lesson is about the tension that is unresolved in Judges, where the people of Israel have been given these promises, but they've also been given these commands. God has promised them something, and He's also commanded something. And we have to ask ourselves this question, which one's going to break first, right? Is God a God of justice? Is He going to punish the people who don't follow His commands? Or is He a God of grace? Is He going to fulfill His promises despite the fact that His people can't seem to do right? We've got these two things in tension against one another. These two things that we can't seem to hold. And what I want you to see is that tension is not going to be resolved in Judges. They constantly have judges. The judges, for a time, when God raises up a judge, the people of Israel do well. But then guess what happens? They backslide, and it goes bad. And God has to raise another judge. And then they finally decide, well, not to jump into the next lesson, but they decide that there's going to be a king. And guess what? That tension is not resolved when they have a king either, right? That tension only gets resolved at the cross. The tension only gets resolved at the cross. It's the only place where it gets resolved. They say that justice and mercy meet on the cross of Christ. In other words, it's only at the cross that God is both a God of grace and justice. Why the cross is so important. Because in our lives, how does this work out? There are times in our lives, especially when we're cognizant of our own sin, when we really love that God is merciful and gracious. We love God's grace to us. We say, we're so thankful that we serve a God that forgives the sinner because we're aware of our own sin. But sometimes when we don't think about our own sin, or when we, as spiritual amnesiacs, kind of forget about our own sin, and especially when we notice other people's sin, and that sin is against us, guess what? We become people who want a God of justice. We want to punish the evildoer. We want the bad person to get what's coming to them. We talk about things like karma, or the idea that, you got what you deserved, and we want to see that justice enacted. And what I want you to see is that we desire both of those things, right? That tension lives inside of us, where we desire to be forgiven for our own sin, but we also don't trust a God who won't punish sin. And that's why we need Christ. That's what's so beautiful about the cross, is at the cross, God is both just in punishing sin, and He is gracious in forgiving sinners. And that's the only way. That's why Jesus had to come and had to die on the cross, right? Is because that's the only way that God can be both gracious and fulfill His promises and be just and punish evil doing. And the beauty of that is that he willingly takes that punishment so that we might, in his grace, receive or become a part of his family. So that tension that's building in Judges, we talk about this all throughout the Old Testament, is that it's kind of a hint of the cross. That tension that's building in Judges is a tension that we're designed to feel. We should feel somewhat uncomfortable or curious about that in some way because it's only going to be resolved in Jesus Christ. Okay, so what are our takeaways today? The takeaways are rather simple. One, first and foremost, God has not called us to practicality. He's not always called us to an easy thing or a halfway faith. He's called us to trust him, especially when things are hard. Not to just do the easy thing. God only calls people to do things that are difficult because when something is difficult, we're forced to trust him. The second thing is that God has called us to do things, and our response often is we can't do it. But the answer is that honestly is that we won't do it. Is that we refuse to do it. Our can'ts are often won'ts, and we need to learn to distinguish between those two things. And the third thing is that there is a tension that's rising in the Old Testament. There's a tension that's been rising ever since Adam and Eve fell. And that tension is only going to be resolved in the perfect sacrifice of Jesus Christ on the cross. All right, well, thanks for joining us for Sunday School. So glad that you could. Again, we're going to continue these through February, and I apologize for not posting them on the Instagram as regularly as I should have been posting them. That's my fault. But thanks for joining us. I hope you're getting something out of this, and we'll see you next week.